I want to set out some thoughts about poverty in America. And I actually draw, it's very easy because I can sort of preempt Peter Edelman, because in his book, which you should read, it basically lays out what the strategies have to be to really have a serious engagement on poverty, particularly the notion of jobs and adequate wage and supports as a critical factor in making any headway on this issue. He also, perhaps best of all, talks about how toxic the environment of poverty is for poor children. It literally rips through their lives and destroys it. And we're going to have a different America if we allow this to continue much longer. But what's more worrisome is something we've never seen, certainly since the Great Depression, which is the issue of long-term unemployment. Half of those people have been out of work more than 6 months, 20% ranging from 1 to 3 years. Once you lose your job, everything else starts to unravel. You can't establish intact families. You can't keep yourself really part of the social fabric. And for many, the end result of that process is abuse, substance abuse, mental problems, and a collapse. And that's why I'm so worried as this cohort in New York City and state starts to march through with chronic unemployment. We have to grab that group quick to make sure that we don't have an outcome that essentially haunts this state and my city for the rest of my life.
Well, but I do sense the conversation changing a little. That it is our issue that we need to confront, whether for moral reasons or not, right? I mean, the nice thing to do is come up with an issue where you can get the right and the left to agree. I also am optimistic because I think some of the policymakers, particularly here in Albany, due to some good city and state leadership, I see that we're turning the corner on a couple of things, right? My feet are now being held more to the fire about demonstrating why what I do matters. What works? No longer can we do something for people just because it feels good and we think it works. Now there's an increasing focus on evidence-based practices and measuring the outcomes. For many, many years the question too often was, well, what did you provide? Now, fortunately, we've turned the corner and increasingly the question is, did it matter? How did it work and why did it work? At the end of the day, while jobs for the current young adults and adults are important, if we don't change the education system, we will be back here talking about these same issues. And I mean a renewed, re-energized focus on education. If we can intervene in one generation of the chronically poor and get them educated, the likelihood that they'll return to that status gets reduced dramatically.
When disaster strikes, we don't focus on the differences between the worthy and unworthy. When disaster strikes, we focus on everyone in need. Yet when employment, wages, and job loss are considered, it is quite interesting to me how easily it is to fall back on the age-old divisions of those who are deserving of aid.
Government can often create and pilot programs and ultimately replicate them. In New York City, one of the programs that Bloomberg has focused on, he created an anti-poverty initiative called the Center for Economic Opportunity. Some of you may have heard about that, but that is meant to be an incubator for new ideas that are run by New York City. It is all privately fundraised for, and the idea is to test new ideas, not using taxpayer levy dollars, but rather on private funds, and figure out what works, and then the ones that do work, to scatter them and actually put them within the departments and the existing infrastructure that exists throughout the city, and then actually support that with tax levy dollars. So I think that's an important role that government can play in this, is really the experimental. Government is great at is potentially integrating a lot of these programs and social services at great scale, and is providing them at great scale and actually integrating them and making sure that certain programs kind of talk to one another, because from the perch of the mayor's office in New York City or from the central perch of DC, decisions can be made to make sure that certain programs that are instrumental and seem key and are successful are kind of talking to and working with all the other programs that exist.